Hello, everybody. This is Mikey Messier with Life Lessons with Mikey Messier. We're kind of doing an interesting thing. We're doing a three-part series with Jimmy Falluca. And Jimmy's in New York. I'm here in Florida. And we're talking about professional wrestling. Now, Life Lessons with Mikey Messier, part of the Wrestling with the Future podcast series. Most of my episodes of Life Lessons is basically me kind of sharing anecdotal advice for folks. These episodes, I wanted to get a hardcore wrestling fan, Jimmy Falluca, and basically talk shop about wrestling. So, Jimmy, on this third and final episode we're going to do together in this series, the topic I want to bring, because it's kind of the way you and I connected. So it's one of these, chicken or the egg type of things in some regard, or you take the good for the bad. And look, because of social media, I connected with Vince Russo. That got me on the brand network for a night. And overnight, my IMDb rating went up. A lot of the brand fans reached out to me. I started doing spots on Generating Heat podcast with JG. Quickly had a podcast with a guy named what's his name? Good guy, Cole Sharp. Cole Sharp, sorry, Cole. Cole Sharp and I did a show together called "What Have They Done to Our Sport?" Hashtag What Have They Done to Our Sport. Eventually, I met a guy named Brian Danovich and did the Brian Danovich show. When Brian passed away, I took over his spot for a while and did the Foreign Object. And then I got on the Wrestling with the Future podcast network, and here I am with the T-shirt. And so my
Very
point
good
is,
show to listen to, guys. Very good show to listen to with some very interesting guests with some great stories to tell.
thank you. Yeah, we had Ron Fuller, who promoted Southeast Wrestling. We had Jimmy Valiant, Magnum TA. My
Oh,
point,
Magnum, one of the
uh,
most underrated workers. And let me tell you something. I feel terrible for what he had to go through. I don't think there's any doubt he would have been NWA champion. No
oh yeah,
doubt.
yep. And so, but my point is, all that stuff came from social media. All that stuff because I was on Wrestling Twitter one night, April of 2018, and Vince Russo put out a tweet, and I responded to it, and then the next thing you know, all those wonderful things happen. So I'm not going to sit here and piss on Twitter or piss on Facebook altogether. But what I want to talk with Jimmy tonight and have a conversation about is the role of social media in professional wrestling and vice versa. Jimmy, what are your opening thoughts on that?
Well, it's a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. In one way, it's good in the aspect of wrestling fans that would have never met each other before get to meet now. Like, if it wasn't for social media, you and I wouldn't know each other. If it
Right.
wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have met a lot of guys that I have on the page that they've messaged me now just to see how I'm doing. We have conversations that have absolutely zero to do with wrestling. Um, they actually take the time to call me just to shoot the breeze to see how I'm doing. It's good in the aspect of that if you're not watching, like me and you don't watch Raw or SmackDown regularly, but if we want to know what's going on without having to change the channel or stop what we're doing, we could find out. We could find out what's going on. But on the other aspect, it is bad because I feel that with the social media, it takes away a little bit from the mystique of the business that it once had. However, as a counter argument to that, a lot of those secrets wouldn't be out if, my friend Larry said this, and it's actually one of the truer statements I've heard. He said kayfabe is only dead because the WWE chose to kill it.
Right.
So, uh, it's bad in the sense of that it takes away a little bit of that mystique, but it's also their own choosing to go down that path. The business chose to go down that path. I don't know a single wrestling organization that has worldwide exposure that doesn't use social media. Everyone from New Japan, Ring of Honor, WWE, Impact, I mentioned Japan, I think, AEW, they all use the internet. They try to use it to their advantage. However, because of the rumors that come out, you know, it kind of feeds a little bit into the fire of what we see on television. Because let me tell you something. I don't think I needed to see a single dirt sheet to know that John Cena was the chosen one. All you had to do was watch the show. You don't need to read, oh, Vince McMahon said that this guy feeds us, to know that he valued him more than anyone else. You mentioned the Nexus angle earlier on. You know, it was obvious what road they should have went down, and they chose not to. Why? Because of one person's opinion.
Right.
You really don't need, and I believe this because I haven't read a single dirt sheet, and I can't tell you how long. I don't really, spend the time to pay for a subscription. I feel bad for the wrestling fans that do, because I feel like they're getting conned, because you really don't need to pay to find these things out. You could just find out just by knowing what goes on the show. So I feel a lot of wrestling fans get conned in that aspect, but I also feel there's another aspect. There's the aspect of that you have certain wrestling fans that come on the internet, which is this is going to be an oxymoron here.
Sure.
They will come on the internet and they will look at someone like you or me and say, you are a member of the IWC, so your opinion doesn't matter. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here laughing my fat rear end off, trying to keep the show clean here with language.
Sure.
You're on the internet talking about wrestling, but yet you're not a member of the internet wrestling community.
Right.
I don't understand how that necessarily works. See, what I feel that is a certain segment of the audience trying to segregate, demonize, and discredit the fan that doesn't just take what they're spoon-fed. See, you have standards. You will not just be spoon-fed crap and pretend it's filet mignon. You're not going to do that. Because you know what? You could think for yourself, yeah, that angle wasn't too bad, or that one kind of sucked. Why did they do that? There are some people that when you make statements like that, apparently you're a horrible human being. And I think that that's silly. I think it's absolutely silly. So whenever I see someone that uses phrases like internet wrestling community, oh, you're a smart mark, things like that, that makes me laugh. Because anyone above the age of reason is smart to the business. If you're above the age of 10 and you don't know that it's a show, I feel sorry for you.
I guess one thing it makes me think of a couple of things when you're talking there, Jimmy. I thought of my, and I consider him a friend of mine, but one thing that I have a little bit of a disagreement on with Vince Russo is his show Castrating the Marks. Have you ever heard of that show or watched it, Jimmy?
No, sir. I have never heard of that show, and just by the name of the title, I have no intention of listening to it.
Well, what Vince and his co-hosts do on the show Castrating the Marks is they basically, the Marks would be Brian Alvarez, Dave Meltzer, Bruce Mitchell, and other wrestling writers. I think they had to retire Ryan Satin, him from the show, because they used him so much or something happened. But basically what they'll do with these guys is they'll bring up audio clips from the dirt sheet writers, whether it's Alvarez or Wade Keller, and they will play clips of the dirt sheet writers doing their shtick, and then Vince Russo will basically analyze and have a big laugh about what these guys said and how off the mark they are. Now, this is a little bit of retribution because a lot of these writers, Meltzer and Wade Keller and Alvarez, have been very critical of Vince Russo throughout his wrestling writing career. So in a sense, this is Russo getting a little bit of revenge. My issue with the show, although it is funny, the show is funny, is that you're kind of, I guess I just don't like the word castrating. It's a little, to castrate someone is pretty physical and demeaning and.
You're basically emasculating someone.
Right. So I find that that's a little bit rough. And then I guess what I take issue with is, and it's part of the things that they make fun of Meltzer in particular, is Meltzer's a big Japanese wrestling fan, New Japan Wrestling and so forth. And sometimes Vince Russo will take issue with the names of the Japanese wrestlers and how can you get into this stuff if you can't pronounce these guys' names is the basic overall vibe. Well, my opinion is, at that point, if you're criticizing wrestling fans for watching wrestling, but yet you worked in pro wrestling yourself, Vince Russo, then pots are calling kettles black and black, and kettles are calling pots black.
Massive double standard there.
Right. So, I mean, if you're, and for instance, a couple of years ago, there was Wrestle Kingdom, which is a Japanese yearly show, I guess, in January.
Yeah, it's Japan's WrestleMania, pretty much.
Right. It takes place in American time, like 4 or 5 in the morning. And a lot of people on Twitter were getting excited about Wrestle Kingdom because they have the New Japan streaming service and they're getting excited and they're all staying up late. And Vince Russo had a big laugh about this. And My feeling is, well, wait a minute. Why are we to laugh at them for enjoying this New Japan Wrestling show at 5 o'clock in the morning, when in fact the WWE product has been so horrible? Why? And Vince Russo admits that it's horrible. Why criticize the hardcore fan who's finding some enjoyment out of wrestling, even if they have to stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning? Now, I can take myself to task, Jimmy, because I go into some of these groups, whether it's Wrestling with the Future podcast group or No DQ or Wrestling Fans or the OWN group, and I can critique other fans. And today, you and I kind of had a thing where I was kind of critiquing your passion for the Bray Wyatt character, and it wasn't out of insult to you. It was more like, hey, let's put a break on this, because I get concerned if we get too into it. Now, I guess what I want to segue in, do the wrestling fans who kind of who go against each other, do you see that as a good thing, Jimmy, or a bad thing? Like you and Frank have this kind of epic, Hatfields McCoy feud, or Von Erich's Freebird.
Would never happen, which I never ever thought was even plausible, because Frank and I had a show that we did together for, let's see, we did a show together from January 2014 that ended at WrestleMania 33, when I went on the longest hiatus I ever went on when it came to wrestling, which was about a year, where I just completely stepped away because I was disgusted by how The Undertaker's career had quote-unquote ended, because we thought it was over.
Right.
I was so disgusted with the fact that they had Roman Reigns beat him and then not turn heel with the amount of heat he had on him. I felt that it was basically Taker putting over the Golden Boy, and nothing positive was going to come out of it, much like his loss at WrestleMania 30. I'm still waiting for someone to show me something positive that came out of it, and I haven't been presented with one. To answer your question, I think it's a horrible thing. I think that we should all be on the same side. We should all want a great show. We should all have high standards. We should all demand our money's worth. And I feel, in a lot of ways, people in the business, people like Vince Russo, people like Triple H, people like Vince, have helped drive a wedge between a lot of wrestling fans, because to certain wrestling, and I'm not going to mention names, but I used to be really close with this guy. He and I were really good friends until we weren't anymore, because he would demean you in such a way if you made even the slightest critical comment about WWE. You're just a mark. You don't know anything. You're not backstage. I don't have to be Steven Spielberg to know whether or not the last Fantastic Four movie was a steaming pile of crap when I saw it in Best Buy for $2 a year after its release. I don't need to be Robert De Niro to know whether or not a scene is any good. I don't need to be a 5-star chef to know whether or not a pizza pie is cooked good or not. And
Right.
I don't have to be in the wrestling business to know whether or not an angle is good or not. Ray Charles, blind as a bat, could see that the finish to the 2015 Royal Rumble was an abject failure. Because when you have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson out there raising your hand and you're still getting booed, and The Rock has a look on his face like he didn't expect that, you know you've done something wrong. And this is where I will give Vince Russo credit, because he talked about that subject on Steve Austin's podcast, the Broken Skulls podcast.
Right.
And he said that if I was working at the WWE when that was happening, I would be literally begging Vince, buzz the referee, tell him to tell Reigns to flip off the crowd. Because Russo's style of booking, which I agree with, go where the audience is taking you. If they want to boo Roman, let him give them a reason to hate him. If
Right.
they want to cheer for Kevin, I'm just throwing a name out there. If they want to cheer for Kevin Owens, let them. Don't insult their intelligence, because that's how you turn people off. Now, that is where it plays into the rivalry between fan against fan. You have a segment of fans that think that you shouldn't even remotely suggest that the show could be improved. Just watch it. Just sit down and be a good little fan.
Be a good little mark.
That's the worst mentality you could have, because basically, in the way my mind works, what you're telling me is, don't have any standards. Don't expect it to be good. Don't expect it to be better. Just shut up and watch the show. And that's been the WWE's mentality. Matter of fact, Jason Solomonster just did his podcast on Sunday, and he recapped a promo Triple H cut from 6 years ago when the WWE got some pretty bad backlash about a show they had. I think it was Battleground 2014, where the show got really, really bad reviews, and Triple H started the show by talking about how he was going to go tell his friend Mark that he was not going to watch the show anymore. He was basically mocking the audience. And you have people that say, oh, that's the greatest promo of all time because Triple H put the fans in their place. First of all, number one, you're supposed to put your paying customers in their place. That seems very counterproductive from a business perspective. That's number one. Number two, how exactly did he, when since 2014 to now, 65% of their audience has disappeared? You can't justify a promo like that because you're basically telling your audience, screw you. You either react as we want or we'll just change the sound later on.
Right.
And that's the worst mentality to have, especially when it comes to me, I look at wrestling the same way I look at government without getting into it. When you don't hold their feet to the fire, you get shit. When you hold their feet to the fire, you get what you need. And wrestling's no different because when Vince's back was against the wall, consistently you got good shows. There was no question about that. Today, they throw shit at the wall hoping that it sticks, and you have people apologizing for it, and they're basically, to me, there is a segment of the fans, they're enabling this stuff. When you apologize for something that's bad, to me, you're enabling it. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think you're right. And I guess my thought is, Jimmy, that the Triple H promo, for example, what it did was this is what I want to say. It's always under the blanket of, oh, we're just in character. This is the WWE's token go-to response for any of these critiques is that when Vince McMahon, or in this case Triple H, says something offensive, obnoxious, where they're insulting the fan, they're insulting the audience, their go-to blanket defense is, we are just in character. Mm-hmm. You know, when for instance, I mean, this is an obscure thing, but about 15 years ago, Stephanie McMahon, when she kind of had that cool, I don't know if it's still the same song, but didn't she have a Little Kim kind of rap intro song? Hey, blah, 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 blah. Like Stephanie McMahon had like a rap song. That was her entrance. And I think it's still her entrance.
I don't completely remember it, but I'll take your word for it.
Right. I think it's still Stephanie McMahon's entrance now. 15 or 20 years later, she's been using the same song, which I think is Little Kim, who's a top rap artist, right?
Okay.
So at the time that they came out with that song for Stephanie McMahon, the word was that was originally supposed to be Trish Stratus's theme song. Okay. That Little Kim, this top recording artist who was very huge in pop culture and rap culture, had recorded a song for Trish Stratus. But once Stephanie McMahon heard the song, she decided, I'm going to take that song.
Okay, then.
and the point is, because that's, and I did a video about this in 2017, Vince McMahon will eat himself, what's wrong with WWE right now. The idea being that the McMahons somehow got it twisted into thinking that they had to put themselves over more so than the talent. And
agreed. Meanwhile, when they were doing the best business they ever did, they were the ones being made to look like fools.
Correct, but guess what? Even them as heels, even the McMahons as heels and fodder, whether it's Kevin Owens stunning Shane McMahon, although he couldn't take a stunner right, and they had to do it twice in editing, or whether it's Stephanie McMahon playing the Uber princess of the women's roster. Mm-hmm. The thing that they lost is, even if they're the top heels, that's not as good as Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and Barry Windham.
No,
that's not.
Oh no, it's not.
And what they think is, and I guess they were given this idea by a USA Network executive who loved the McMahons as heels. People get sick of the same heels for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And when you have the McMahons trot themselves out and they have the talent stand on the partition and they treat the talent like a bunch of children who need to be scolded, my opinion, and I could be wrong, is that's the McMahons how they feel about the audience. And so what they're basically saying is, you, the audience, and you, the wrestlers, are our children. We are the father figure. We are the mother figure. We are the gods, and you obey and worship us. Now, when I
You're
started,
not
Jimmy,
far off at all, sir. I don't
right.
believe you are.
Well, thank you. And when I started doing this angry wrestling character, Jimmy, and I want to get some of your take on my videos, I guess, or my persona on the Facebook groups. My whole quest was to kind of challenge the fan to challenge themselves. Because a guy like JD from New York, or even my buddy Joe Cronin, were doing these podcasts, and they were always criticizing the current product, but they would never just say, "Hey guys, why are we still watching this crap?" Like that level of integrity, or that level of just blunt. You'll never hear JD from New York. You'll never hear Brian Alvarez say, "Hey guys, you know what? WWE is not watching anymore. Maybe check out some La Lucha Libre from 1998, or check out Wrestle Kingdom, or maybe check out this Impact, or check out, you know what I mean?" They would never just say, "Hey, watch some Jim Crockett wrestling, some Mid South, some Memphis." And my thing was to challenge the current product wrestling fan to create their own wrestling time machine and visit territories that are out of business. Even if you have to go through the WWE network to see it, at least give yourself some exposure to some of these better wrestling, like Starrcade 83 or whatever, Super Brawl 3, Sting Vader strap match.
Or
Show,
even go to Beach Blast when you had that incredible 30-minute Iron Man match between Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Ravishing Rick Rude. To me, one of the most underrated matches I've ever seen, and you had two of the best workers that have ever done it. I actually watched that match with my sister recently, and she watched it, and she couldn't believe she saw Steamboat break out a Tombstone Pile Driver.
right.
Uh, and how crisp Rick Rude was in that ring. It's actually amazing that that guy was literally under everyone's noses, and some people didn't even realize it.
Right, and Rick Rude never, and at the time, Rick Rude never got a big world title run. He was supposed to. He was supposed to win at Starrcade '92, but he was injured.
Yeah.
So I guess my point, Jimmy, is I've always tried to provoke, not always, but for the last 3.5 years, I've tried to provoke my fellow wrestling fan to raise their own level of gamemanship as a fan to enjoy the sport more. And I guess my question for you, Jimmy, is: do you think that type of conversation is that like one step beyond what the wrestling fan these days is willing to accept? Is that too much to ask from
No,
most wrestling
not at
fans?
all. I don't think it's too much to ask whatsoever, because I could tell you I had a few friends of mine, one of which lives in Brooklyn, message me during the quarantine, say, "Hey, Jim, do me a favor. Give me a list of 10 matches from WCW I could watch. Give me a list of 10 matches from ECW that I could watch because I'm stuck in the house and I'm sick." I'd be able to name 10 matches off the top of my head that I thought were watchable. Um, there's plenty of matches that people could watch that they could enjoy. I remember, for example, I have a friend who didn't have the network. My friend lets me use his password because I refuse to give them my money.
Sure,
I just refuse. To
fair
me,
enough.
if they want me to pay, they have to earn it. So my friend gave me permission. He checked. My other friend checked that. I said, "Oh." He said, "All right, give me a match that's gonna wow me." He said, "Give me a match that I could watch that I'm absolutely gonna love." I said, "Okay. You want a match that you're absolutely gonna love? Here's what you do: go into WrestleMania 3 and you watch Ricky the Dragon Steamboat versus the Macho Man Randy Savage. Then, when you're done with that, I want you to go to WCW and I want you to type in Ric Flair versus Terry Funk in the I Quit match.
New York Knockout.
And if those two matches don't make you a fan of those promotions at that time, I will be shocked."
Okay.
By the time he was done with Savage and Steamboat, he said, "Is Flair and Funk anywhere close?" I said, "Oh, yeah, it is. Oh, yeah, it is." And then when he was done, I gave him a bonus: Starrcade 93, Flair and Vader. I
The
said,
chip tooth.
you want to see a match with one of the best technicians to ever enter the ring, with the most athletic super heavyweight to ever step through ropes? And I know I'm giving high praise to Leon White, but I feel Vader deserves that type of praise.
I do too.
The most athletic super heavyweight I've ever seen.
Yeah, he was great.
God bless Yokozuna and Bam Bam Bigelow. I think that they're in that conversation because they could move, especially Yokozuna. But Vader was just, man, he was of a different breed. He was of a different breed, man. And my friend watched those 3 matches, and he said, man, if I'm ever stuck home and I need wrestling to watch, I'm coming to you. I've had friends call me Fallucapedia because I have, not trying to be arrogant, but I have a decent level of knowledge of classic wrestling matches that if I needed to play, if you told me, all right, listen, you can only watch 10 wrestling matches, then you can't watch wrestling anymore, I would have a hard time putting together that top 10 list because there are certain matches that when I watch them, I'm happy.
Right.
I put on the first pay-per-view I ever watched, which was Buried Alive, 1996, Mankind versus The Undertaker. I love that rivalry. I could watch Steve Austin versus Bret Hart from Survivor Series. That's the match no one talks about. It was their first match. It was a masterpiece. I loved it from start to finish. A more recent match, I suppose I can give, The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 25.
Sure.
I could watch that match over and over again. You know, one of the best matches I ever seen. So yes, it is a conversation that I think does need to happen, especially when you have times where the shows are not entertaining, the shows are not really, giving you your money's worth, but there's also a downside to that, Mike, that I think you might have missed. And I would like to point that out to you if that's okay.
Please do. We've got about 3 minutes.
The downside is when they see all those matches, they see all those moments, they see all those rivalries that we were fortunate and blessed enough to see, they're going to sit there and scratch their head saying, how the hell did it go from this to that?
To Dolph Ziggler versus Drew McIntyre in a match that we know is a foregone conclusion.
With zero interest, with 2 really good in-ring workers,
right.
2 really good talkers, but I had no interest in that match because Ziggler's had so many start and stop pushes. Why would anyone above the age of 3 even think he has a remote chance?
We already know that Randy Orton's booked to get SummerSlam. I guess here's one thing we didn't get to, and that's okay, but just the wrestlers, kind of and good points, Jimmy, the tweets from the wrestlers, hey, I had a great time working with Such and Such tonight, and afterwards we all went to Waffle House and fed ourselves.
I hear what you're saying. Yes, that does take away, and that's on them. That is where I will give the wrestlers a degree of blame because they don't stay true to their characters. A lot of them could take an example from Taker that, during his heyday, he lived the gimmick.
Right.
And I think that if he was around in the internet age, I think he still would have did it.
Yeah.
Because that was his commitment to the craft, and that was his commitment to the business. But that's just one man's opinion.
Well, we see so many wrestlers. There's a whole thing I could get into about Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega kind of teased a match on the internet before Jericho was really done with WWE, and he and Omega had a few little barbs, and people took notice of it. But then suddenly Jericho's in Japan attacking Kenny Omega, setting up basically one of the seeds for AEW, which was back in New Japan 2.5 years ago.
Which was a pretty damn good match, by the way.
Yes, it was. And it kind of revitalized Chris Jericho, and it made people realize, wow, some of these veteran wrestlers, and Jericho is the exception to the rule, but once the reins, so to speak, are free from these guys,
they can still go.
They can still go. And a guy like Jericho, and what Steve Austin said to Jericho was, you were free. And Austin said, it reminded me of a Brian Pillman if he had been alive, what he would have been doing at age 50 or 47 at the time.
High praise coming from Steve because he loves the shit out of Brian Pillman. God rest his soul. That's
right. Well, Jimmy, we're hitting the 30-minute mark, man. We could probably bang out another show, but we'll hold off. We'll do that another time.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank you, and keep being a wrestling fan. I guess the surprise of my night was that you didn't aspire to work in the business, but it seems like you got a pretty good life going on for yourself right now in New York. Congratulations on the family and the career, and stay safe out there, buddy.
I certainly will. You do the same, Mike. Please do so. And thanks for having me. I really enjoyed myself.
Most definitely. Mikey Messier, Jimmy Falluca, Life Lessons.